This is the Open University.
Good afternoon. It's more like evening in terms of the light. It's quite dark already. It's a Sunday. Here in Germany, everything usually is closed on Sunday, and it's a little melancholy as a result, especially when there's no daylight. But in December, there are some exceptional opening hours. So, for instance, IKEA is open today, and just as a kind of mental resort, I like the idea that I could go to IKEA and rush against the tide like a salmon swimming upriver of Christmas shoppers. The stream, the constant flow of greedy, materialistic Christmas shoppers. I tend to stay put at Christmas. I don't travel. I don't go and stay with my family. I avoid public holidays and religious holidays like the plague. I just try to make them pass. So that's what I'm doing. Working a little bit on my book, my manuscript, and posting selfies to Tumblr. If Tumblr still exists, I think it does. They banned obscenity after being accused of permitting child porn and being banned from the Apple Store, the Apple App Store. But I think they still exist in principle, in theory. And I don't really have a specific topic today, but I was thinking about beauty, aesthetics. Tumblr is still the most interesting platform to me to spend time on. And one of the things I do at the end of the year is I look back at my year on my Tumblr photographs. So that's my selection of the... by the way, did you notice my engagement ring? My fiancée was here in Berlin last weekend and we bought these rings. So my 2019 is probably going to take place, at least half of it will take place in Paris. I think I want to stay put until I finish my book, which is due in June of next year with the publisher, or with the beginning of the editing process anyway. So I think I want to stay here living alone until then, and then possibly move to Paris. But as I was saying, yeah, if I look back at my year, I look back from Tumblr because that's the most aesthetic website. And I think I'm really thinking a lot these days about wasting time. I don't want to waste time doing, paying attention to things which are pointless. Brexit, for instance, is pointless. Really, whether it happens or not. Obviously, there are huge consequences for Britain, but I think the whole thing has been a colossal waste of time. It probably won't happen. I'm not really interested in the mechanisms by which it doesn't happen. My sister's actually campaigning for the People's Vote quite vociferously at the moment, and good luck to her. But I have so little faith in Britain and the British people in general. I think it's a much larger cultural problem we have just now with being an evil fuck, basically. I think that's the problem. How to make people less individualistic, less selfish, less... And this is a Christmas message, if you like. Although Christmas in the West is a weird time, all these sort of reports about homelessness suddenly pop up in the media, and the rest of the year people don't give a shit. People get sentimental and they watch It's a Beautiful Life. I think the real point would be to try to just become less individualistic and to do that all year round. So the whole idea of rejecting the EU is tied up with individualism, rejecting team spirit. There's really not been a narrative about how it's better to be part of a group, how it's better to be, in a shoal of fish rather than the lone fish. There is still this individualistic Western idea, especially prevalent in the US and UK, that somehow to be a maverick is good. Most Asian ways of seeing would look at that and say you're not strong when you're out on your own, when you're the fish out on its own. That doesn't make you the leader or the maverick or whatever. So collectivism really needs to be emphasized, including by the British opposition party, which presumably is a collectivist party. Anyway, I'm wasting my breath talking about it really, because whatever happens, I've realised I'm not on the same page as those people in Britain and their political process. And I just hope to keep living my own kind of happy life. And a life dominated by aesthetics. So I mean, the sites, Facebook for me gets more and more ugly to look at. Just that blue and white thing. I've turned it in, on some of my mobile devices, I've flipped it over to, you can reverse the color patterns, so you get sort of black instead of white. So it's black and blue, like bruises now, and with lots of orange kind of, the smiley faces, which I really hate. I don't want to look at smiley faces anywhere on the internet. I don't mind orange vinyl though. Let's just talk about aesthetics. I think in future I've also been thinking I should only release on vinyl because it's so much more beautiful. There is really an ugliness in CDs which I just can't stand anymore. I played this. This is by the New Humans, a group in New York led by a Japanese artist called Mika. And isn't this their packaging, their artwork is absolutely beautiful. Orange vinyl. I mean, what could be more pleasant? This is a very, very minimalistic electronic record, which I could put on actually, just to give you a little impression. It's at is it at 33 or 45? I think I played it at 45 actually. So really, that is my message of the year. I look back at the most beautiful visual moments of the year on my Tumblr, using a thing called Tumblr Collage. And, I've been in all these amazing countries this year. I've been in Myanmar and in Vietnam and in Malaysia and in Laos, and also Korea and also Japan. And then more static here in Berlin and in Italy the second half of the year. Writing my book, making a record. One of my books, The Book of Scotland, was republished, and I'm working on the one which is coming out in 2020, which is a memoir. Also, I have Herr F., my novel of the Faust legend, coming out in a German edition for the first time on paper, anyway, through a Swiss publisher in 2019. And it's all very much dictated by what's beautiful for me. I don't know. I'm just kind of, as time runs out for me, I'm sort of determined to spend less time on less beautiful things, and to realize that the people I have real affinities with are also people who have a very strong aesthetic. These basketwork slippers, by the way, are from a shop down on the Karl Marx Strasse, which I think is Bulgarian. If not, I'll put a little caption saying the real country it is. But they sell handcraft stuff, and these are 15 euros, and they're handmade slippers, and they feel super comfortable. They really are quite gripping as well. They grip on slippery surfaces, but mostly they evoke for me a parallel world in which we're still into folk crafts and things like that. So I suppose, and Jan Lindenberg, who's also remade this flat, this very 19th century flat. I suppose it reminds me of the 19th century flats of my childhood in Edinburgh, because it has a certain dimension in the doors and a mysterious kind of, lots of nooks and crannies up little steps and things like that. The bathroom is actually in a mezzanine. I lived in a Georgian mezzanine in 7 Ainsley Place when I was starting my first band, The Happy Family. And that was a mysterious Kafkaesque space behind an oval window mirror door in the stairwell. There is a certain atmospheric beauty to 19th century environments, which I appreciate. And in some ways, it's one of the only things I'm really excited by looking at on the internet these days is architecture, reports on especially Japanese architecture. People like Yoshimada, who is part of Tato Architects in Japan, especially a certain kind of Japanese combination of modesty and utility and beauty. And I really respond to that. A lot of Western architecture is kind of decadent, ugly, vulgar buildings for rich people, but in Japan there is a certain modest simplicity. Yoshimada first barged into my consciousness with a house. He's Osaka-based. Tato Studio is in Osaka, and he he made this house on stilts up on the hillside in Kobe, overlooking the city of Kobe, which was really a sort of industrial shed raised up on stilts. And he's very interested in stilt designs. He went to Australia and made a house which was influenced by a certain Australian form of raising villas on platforms or stilts. I forget, it's not Winnebago, but there's a word like that for those houses in Queensland, I think. And he made a sort of Japanese version of that, and he's very interested in... it goes back to ancient rice grain storage buildings which the Japanese made to keep insects and pests away from their rice. So that aesthetic is super powerful for me. So if I ever ran into money, serious money, I would probably be very tempted to spend it on having a beautiful life and a structure. I'm sort of divided. I'm split between whether I build a house, or ideally get Yoshimada to build a house for me in that style of modest beauty, and it would probably have to be in Japan as well, or just traveling constantly, because I get a real buzz from traveling. This year was great. I found I could spend a month in a place like Yangon and then get on a plane and go to Kuala Lumpur and be in a totally different world, and just have a sense of revitalization each time I went to a new destination. So one of the things I'm thinking of doing with my fiancée, once we marry, is just not to have an address at all, just to be constantly traveling in a sort of nomadic way from place to place. And you can do that surprisingly cheaply. And it becomes a kind of drug, it really is compelling to live that way, to not have, the usual routes. To live with a certain precarity, obviously, and a certain au hasard, à l'improviste, to improvise one's life. But it is, it should be motivated by beauty and appetite. Even if it's an appetite for quite stripped down things and simple things, simplicity in different locations. I don't know. So I'm watching, sort of YouTube video or Vimeo videos of presentations of architects, and essentially the visual. I think even words get in the way sometimes. The visual is very compelling for me. An idea of visual simplicity and beauty. I suppose a post-Protestant aesthetic, but it could be an Asian aesthetic as well. But it's also collectivist. It's all about celebrating crafts. The dignity of wear and tear, wabi-sabi, is part of it. I think it is almost a religious or a spiritual value. And I think my friend Jan, who now lives in the countryside and is sort of slowly refurbishing various agricultural buildings in a town called Gerswalde, I think he shares this religion with me. I think we're on the same page, and that's why I feel very much at home in his space. I mean, it's not a well-finished space in a traditional kind of sense. There are holes on the big plaster, bits of plaster have fallen off the walls, but he's put in a wood-burning stove, which I spend a lot of time just gazing into of an evening. That's another form of beauty which I'm very much attuned to. The beauty of, say, radio. I've been listening, for instance, to H.G. Wells' Mr. Kipps. I think it's just called Kipps, actually, this novel he wrote, along with The History of Mr. Polly. These were his non-science fiction novels, more autobiographical, depicting the life of the petite bourgeoisie at the turn of, the Edwardian age. So what I have is, I have two Bluetooth speakers on either side of my roaring log fire, and so it's very retro kind of beauty of sitting gazing at the flames of the log fire while listening to this kind of storytelling on the radio, and that's beautiful. Or even just replacing this bulb. There was a mirrored light bulb there, and I've replaced it with a different. Somehow I like the utility of this light bulb, and this is going to sound very stupid. I'm lighting this with my IKEA panel, my trad-free remote-controlled panel, so I can actually, I can be very clever. I have the remote control for this, and I can change the color. I can change the brilliance of the lighting. Makes it darker. You can probably see me much worse now. But also, it can change the color of the lighting, so I can get much warmer. I could be even warmer still if I lit this scene with my halogen heater. That could be exciting. These things which I don't know. I sort of trust my aesthetic instincts, and I remember being told at university that this was a big mistake by a philosophy tutor. But I disregarded his words because he didn't look very good. He was just the typical beardy philosophy tutor, and so I didn't trust him. But I think, if I look at, for instance, the British Houses of Parliament and how they conduct themselves, but also how those people look. How they speak, first of all, which is, there is an aesthetics of grammar and of language use, which they fail miserably at. They have a very ugly way of speaking. Not as ugly as management and sort of employment personnel talk, but it's still very ugly. And there's actually been a great radio series by John, what's his name? Guy who does video reports for The Guardian. His name is here. About how we are the victims of narrative. And that's been on Radio 4, and it's very. There've been three parts of it so far. I think it's very a sophisticated look at the way, especially political storytelling, really dominates us, and how it's not about appeals to reason or fact, or even self-interest. It's about a set of values, usually about a vanished golden age, which is very compelling. Unfortunately, so "Make America Great Again," a slogan which Trump stole from Ronald Reagan, is it's the simplest possible statement of a great story structure, which is that there was a golden age. We've lost something which was valuable to us. We must re-find it. The MacGuffin of a supposed age of glory. It must be rediscovered. And so I think this series really shows quite successfully how easily we are manipulated by stories like that, and what terrible damage they can do. I think we're seeing Britain just now essentially sinking into the North Sea, as a result of its own stupid, innate conservatism and its gullibility in going for, first of all, unfulfillable promises, which are actually criminal in nature. The Leave campaign is being showed, has been proven to be, first of all, Russian aiding, Russian-inspired, troll-inspired sort of counterattack against the EU, which they rightly fear as a kind of legitimizing force, a kind of a force for legality throughout the world, and also a force for continuing globalization. But also, it shows that Brexit is simply a series of manipulative tropes, which are not taking us into any better place, actually, but do appeal to something. And I suppose this would be my way into understanding where those people are coming from, that is their aesthetic sense of, we need a shape which we can understand, which has borders around it. Let's put a thick line around the UK, and then we can understand it as something wonderful to celebrate. We can't understand it as part of a group, part of a collectivity. So I think this is the tragic flaw, if you like, the Achilles heel of Britain. It's always had the possibility of being sunk by this kind of false belief, or the emotive appeal, anyway, of this kind of logic. So this radio series, I'd really recommend this series as a way of looking at story as something toxic. And there are some people that he's interviewing who don't believe in the continuity of, for instance, an individual. The past is gone. That person who was in the past is not the person I am now. Why should I even identify myself with that person? Why should we say our lives have stories? Why should we propose ourselves as the proponents, the lead characters in our own life stories even? Why should a life have a story? I mean, isn't it all a bit random? And karma doesn't exist, there is no payback for anything. Therapy, for instance, likes to make these little narratives. You go in and you see a therapist and they construct a story which you then orient your life around. You start blaming people for having done X, Y, and Z, or you start saying, I need to do this instead of that, as part of the story, and stories are brutally simple and brutally reductive. So this is something I'm resisting a little bit, writing a memoir. I'm trying to use a multiplicity of voices, and because I don't really believe in the continuous narrative voice, the continuous persona that, you're born this little character and you can narrate your life from A to Z rather. I think I I want to complicate that, but I realize that in doing so, I make it less compelling, less emotionally compelling, for instance. There's a sentimental punch which you can get from narrating your life in a continuous voice as if you're an unchanging essence of yourself and you know who you are. I mean, yeah, a lot of the powerful biographies are based on that premise. You have to understand about me that I'm someone who has continuously kicked against the pricks in the name of originality, in the name of subtlety, in the name of perversity. I've deliberately done things which have not been popular or not been successful, and such is my stubbornness that I believe that it's actually a virtue to have done that, and not simply commercial idiocy or artistic impotence. Of course, it's possible that I'm wrong, and that people would like a more conventional narrative. Even, say, Cosi Fanny Tutti's autobiography, she was one of Throbbing Gristle, is told in this relatively straightforward way. It's won lots of awards and great reviews and things, and it's told in a very continuous narrative voice, as if she's always been the same person, and I chose not to do that, and perhaps I'm going to pay the price for that. We'll see. I mean, I really like where I'm going with this, but it is very fragmented, and it is very ironic, and it is frustrating on some level. Possibly people will find it a frustrating read, or possibly they'll find it amusing. I don't know. Anyway, yes, that is the ironies. I mean, just as John Cage, for instance, was always trying to essentially impose his intentions even when he claimed to be escaping from intentionality. So I am actually imposing an idea of myself which is continuous, but it's just that I've always been a trickster. This is the continuity of my selfhood, is that I'm always a trickster and always trying to come in and do something slightly different, original, whatever. So because that's my image of myself, I come in proposing that there is no continuity, but that is the continuity. Anyway, on that paradox, I think I'm going to leave things. I never know what I'm going to say when I begin these talks, but themes always do emerge, and I think aesthetics, my personal aesthetics, and the increasing importance, my increasing realization of the importance of aesthetics to me, and of time running out, time to indulge other ways of looking at the world, including the political ways. That is probably my theme for today.
Open University.